Muted. Good morning, good morning, good morning. First and foremost, giving honor to God who allows me to come to you in this manner on a weekly basis. How's everybody doing out there? I appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. We got some good mornings already. Let's see what's going on here. OT, good morning, my brother. Good morning. Appreciate support. Brian Hoodie, good morning. Appreciate support. Michelle Long, good morning. Good morning. Appreciate support. Saturday morning, y'all, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. What we always do about this time. rwcoolings.com. That's the website. You can go there, get all the information. All the links are there. RW Coolings over all social media platforms. We're broadcasting live on Facebook and YouTube this morning. Broadcasting live after the show. You can download on Spreaker.com and Apple iTunes to listen to the audio. And you can also go back to YouTube and Facebook and watch the show after the fact. If you missed something or you didn't pick up on something or you want to clarify something that I may have said, feel free to do that as well. Something's wrong with my headphones, y'all. Hold on. Everything ain't sounding right today. All right. I think I'm good now. Hold on. Something just not adding up here. There we go. All right. We're good now. Call in number 844-904-2665, 844-904-2665. No matter what the situation is, this voice be heard. All we ask is say what you mean what you say if you call in. And, you know, we come in this family, we leave his family, speak on the show family. That's what we do here on the Speak on the Show. Episode 11, that's where we're at. It's an unscripted Saturday, y'all. It's an unscripted Saturday. And I know people want to talk about what's been going on last weekend, but we're gonna get into that a little later. Let's get some of these politically speaking things out the way real quick. Let's get this show on roll. Let's do what we do when we do what we do. So we're still dealing with voting rights. Voting rights, we got this midterm elections coming up at the end of the year. Midterm elections coming up at the end of the year. You got people out there announcing their candidacies, what's going on in your state, who's running for what. Some of the Senate seats are up. Pay attention to who's running, pay attention to who you may vote for, and pay close attention to what they stand for. Not what they're telling you, but what the background is. You need to go in there, start looking at these things because people are portraying, while they're running, they're portraying a certain background, a certain mindset, a certain belief in our political system. But once they get in, it totally changes as we've seen. So we need to really be paying attention to this thing. But this week, a federal judge on Thursday ruled that parts of Florida's new voting restrictions unconstitutionally disenfranchised Black voters and banned the state from making certain voting changes without approval from the court for the next decade. Now, this is in Florida. And, there's a lot of things going on in these different places where the GOP, Republicans, are in the state legislature. And they're dictating a lot of what's going on with the voting. This U.S. District Judge Mark Walker ruled that portions of the law restricting the use of ballot drop boxes, assistance for voters, and third-party voter registration drives violated the Voting Rights Act and constitutional protections because they were passed with the intent to discriminate against Black voters. So this is already being said by this judge and what he looked at and everything that was written. And he wrote a 288-page ruling against Florida on the way they're handling the voter registration and voting restrictions and everything like that. So this is in Florida. Now, we also had Georgia, Texas, all these different states that are dealing with this voter registration and who can vote and who can't vote. North Carolina's going through it. There's certain pockets of this. Pay attention in your state, what they're doing to minimize the amount of people that are able to get to the polls. And as I said, this U.S. District Judge Mark Walker specifically said that portions of the law restricting the use of ballot drop boxes, assistance for voters, and third-party voter registration drives violated the Voting Rights Act and constitutional protections because they were passed, in quote, with the intent to discriminate against Black voters. That should tell you everything you need to know right there. Because what it is the mindset is most African Americans, Blacks, vote Democrat. So the Republicans are in here and they're trying to change the dichotomy on how you're able to vote. They're trying to change the dichotomy on who will show up to the polls in order for them to stay in power. As I always say, it's about the power. It's about money. It's about money, power, no respect. Money, power, no respect. And that's just how it is. James Battle, appreciate the support, my brother, appreciate the support. But this judge wrote a 288-page ruling. And it wrote that the requirement was necessary because Florida has repeatedly, recently, and persistently acted to deny Black Floridians access to the franchise of voting. Now, here's the thing about this. If you remember, when we were coming up on the election last time I talked to you about, I brought up the fact that I did a push and I actually donated. I gave y'all the information about donating to help people pay their fines in Florida who were being held, being disenfranchised from voting because they had criminal records or they had fines they needed to pay. And there was this big push to get those people's fines paid so they would be able to vote. And this was all in Florida. And now that they're taking drop boxes out, they're trying to disenfranchise the voting public and all these type things, you need to pay attention in your own state of what's going on around there that's limiting, listen to what I'm saying, limiting your access to the polls in order to get out there and let your voice be heard. See, we always talk about our vote, and we always emphasize how, or I emphasize anyway, how our ancestors marched and fought for us to have the right to vote. And then when we see these certain Republicans in certain districts in certain states doing everything in their power to minimize and delegitimize your vote, we need to stay strong and get people out to the polls to let their voices be heard. We can't continue to just be laissez-faire about this and say, oh, it's not affecting me because it's not my state. If it's affecting one state, it trickles into the other states, and we need to stay conscious of that. We need to stay conscious of that. Jerry L. Page, good morning, my brother. Good morning, my brother. Appreciate the support. But it also says Florida was one of the numerous Republican-led states that passed new voting restrictions amid former President Donald Trump's campaign to stoke lies about the election, which were often aimed at areas of states he lost that had large Black populations. Judge Walker, in his ruling, wrote that racism was a motivating factor behind Florida's new voting law, SB 90. See, this is where I think we get caught. Good morning, Lady Michelle. Appreciate the support. I think this is where we get caught and we get laissez-faire about this, because this judge looked at everything that was being done. Now, this is a judge. He looked at all the laws. He looked at everything that was being done and recognized that these laws are being put in to affect the large population of Black voters. So when you're going after a certain demographic of voters, that tells you exactly what they're doing. The fear has always been that Blacks will always vote Democrat. You have a pocket of people that vote Republican, but the majority vote Democratic. And if you put these rules out there and these blockades out there against the voters getting to the polls, what they can do when they get to the polls, how they're voting, whether they can do drop boxes and all that, this minimizes the amount of people that want to go through all that. Think about it. Sometimes we get so caught up in what we can't do and all the roadblocks that we don't want to go over, we don't go around, we just stop. And then when someone's elected into office that we don't agree with, we just sit back and we argue, and we fight and we're pissed off and everything because things aren't going our way on how we think things should go. But then we have to look in the mirror and wonder, what did we do or what didn't we do in order to let our voices be heard? This is the thing that this judge found in Florida, and they're saying it's going to go to the Supreme Court and probably get overturned because of the wording or anything like that. But it just lets you know that what the Republican Party is doing right now in certain states that they have the power in is doing everything they can to minimize and delegitimize your vote as a person of color. And the redistricting, I've seen something, and I can't remember the state, but they're redistricting to minimize a seat in the Senate, in the House, to break it down from the way they redistrict. Now they have 3 African Americans in those districts, 3 African Americans serve on there. But what they're trying to do is combine some to split out and get another House seat, or take a House seat away from one of them in order to get their numbers up in the House. That might confuse some of y'all, but y'all need to go back and read this stuff. These are the things that we talk about. These are the things that we look at, and sometimes it becomes second nature because we only talk about it when it's election season. But when you're talking about elections are a 24/7, 365-day-a-year process that we need to be involved in. We need to be paying attention to, because they started this before the last election for president, and it's been going on ever since to try to eliminate, minimize the amount of people that make it to the polls legally. This is what we need to pay attention to. It doesn't make sense that we sit back and wait till the last minute and then we want to yell that this was done wrong. James Battle is working well in Florida because in an article I read this morning, there are more Republicans than Democrats registered to vote in Florida for the first time in years, more than 100K more. That tells you everything you need to know. I had to look at that. I'm gonna do some reading after this too, Battle. I appreciate that. But this is what I'm saying. We got to get away from just going by what everybody tells us and get in and read for ourselves. There's certain things, it may not be, and here's the thing. If just prime example, James Battle lives in Texas. I live in Nevada. Not to tell everybody where you at, Battle, but I'm using this as an example. Don't y'all go stalking James Battle. But he lives in Texas. I live in Nevada. What we lose focus of is the fact that just because I'm in Nevada, what's going on in Florida, it still affects me. He lives in Texas. What's going on in Florida still affects him in Texas. Because what they're doing is they're drawing a roadmap, and if it passes in one state, they're trying in other states, they're trying in other states, and it trickles all over. So we all need to be engrossed in what's going on and understanding that what's going on in a state that we may not live in could be going on in a state that you live in. They're just writing everything down, getting all the facts together, what happened through this process over here, so we don't have to deal with the same thing to get it passed over here. We can cut out all that extracurricular and go straight to the meat of getting these things eliminated so we can get the people voting that we want voting. All things being equal, now this was the chief counsel, all things being equal, that if the Florida law is intentional discrimination, the Georgia law should be intentional discrimination. This came from Jonathan Greenbaum, chief counsel for Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. He said, but there's no guarantee that our judge in Georgia or the judges in Texas cases are going to look at it the same way. Exactly what I was just saying. All things being equal, that if the Florida law is intentional discrimination, Georgia laws and the Texas laws should be on the same board. But depending on the judges that are looking at it, depending on the judges that were appointed and who they were appointed by, can make the difference on whether Florida, Georgia, and Texas have the same outcome, or if each of them have different outcomes, depending on who's judging over that case at that time. And this all deals with election laws, Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act has been minimized so much where they're picking and choosing things that they feel are important and minimizing them and changing them to feed into the fact of delegitimizing your vote, of who's going to the polls, who can go to the polls, and what you're doing while you're at the polls. Just saying, we need to pay attention to this stuff. We need to be involved in the process, not the outcome. We don't need to just be involved in the outcome. We need to be involved in the process from the beginning until we get an outcome. That's why I bring y'all this information, because I know, and I'm not saying I know everything, don't get me wrong, but I think there's certain things that we need to talk about that we need to stay cognizant about when it comes to what's going to go on with these elections, because elections have consequences depending on the outcome. And we need to be aware of that. Case in point, the House has voted with a slim bipartisan majority to federally decriminalize marijuana. The House has voted with a slim bipartisan majority to federally decriminalize marijuana. The vote was 220 to 204. Republicans Tom McClintock of California, Brian Mast, and Matt Gaetz, both of Florida, joined the majority of Democrats in supporting the bill, while Democrats Henry Culler of Texas and Chris Pappas of New Hampshire voted against it. Now, here's what the bill is about. The bill, sponsored by Democratic Rep. Jerry Nadler of New York, will prevent federal agencies from denying federal workers security clearances for cannabis use, and will allow the Veterans Administration to recommend medical marijuana to veterans living with post-traumatic stress disorder, plus gains revenue by authorizing a sales tax on marijuana sales. This is how they're going about decriminalizing marijuana. Now, this was in the House. Remind you, this was in the House. Still has to go to the Senate. The bill also expunges the record of people convicted of nonviolent cannabis offenses, which House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer said can haunt people of color and impact the trajectory of their lives and career indefinitely. So what this is all about, well, let me finish up. He can result in difficulty finding employment, difficulty finding housing, denial of access of federal benefits, denial of financial aid at colleges and universities, and denial of the right to vote, Hoyer said. That's why we're dealing with this. So in a nutshell, what this is dealing is about decriminalizing marijuana. What they're doing is they're going back and trying to fix a wrong that has gone on for years and years and years. You know, back in the day when, you know, the war on drugs and all this, where people would have a minimum amount of marijuana or a minimum amount of crack cocaine or anything like that. And for that minimum amount, they were thrown in jail for 20, 30 years for the amount they had. But now they're trying to decriminalize this, and the people that were convicted for nonviolent crime, you know, drug crimes, the records can be expunged. You know, they're just trying to right a wrong. However, if you really look at it, when they legalize marijuana and they allow these dispensaries per se to open up, and they got dispensaries out. I'll give you a prime example. Out here in Las Vegas, there's a dispensary on every corner. But when they allow these dispensaries to open up, see, what they did was they cornered the market on the legalizing of marijuana. Because out here in Las Vegas alone, and I'll give you this prime example, out here in Las Vegas alone, I don't think there is maybe but two. I'm going, man, maybe going out on a limb because I know there's one dispensary that's black owned. Let me say that again. Out of all the dispensaries, and if you ever come to Las Vegas, you'll see them on every corner. You can come out here and get high all you want. But on every corner, there's a dispensary, but there's only one that I know of off the top of my head that is black owned. Because there was so much paperwork and so much red tape and how much money you had to start off a dispensary and all these different things that they put in place to keep certain people from being able to open a dispensary. But now that it's legalized and they're making money off of the marijuana, now they got to try to go back and fix and correct what they did before for people that were selling it on the street corners and different things like that. Now, I'm not saying, let me clear this up, not saying that what people were doing back in the day on the street corner, I call them street corner pharmacists, whatever you want to call them, was a good thing. However, they took that thing and made it into big business for some folk. But the one folks that were held accountable and did jail time for that were left out of the loop because they couldn't afford it. And as it mentioned, this Decriminalized Marijuana Act is going to be finally able to expunge the records of those that were sentenced for those acts back in the day. But at this point, prime example in Las Vegas, they're not even taking any more applications for people to open dispensaries because there's so many. There's a backlog of people wanting to open dispensaries. So when you talk about the decriminalization of marijuana, that's one thing. But then when you talk about how people were vilified and criminalized because of marijuana content that they were selling at the time, it's two different worlds, two completely different worlds. But I hope this passes. More than likely, it's not going to pass. It's got to go to the Senate. If it was 220 to 204 in the House, you know, you got a 50-50 split in the Senate. You got to get at least 60 because this is one where they what they call it, the you know what I'm talking about. It's not a majority vote. You got to have 60 in order for it to pass. So I don't see it passing because you're probably not going to get 10 Republicans come to the Democratic side if you have 50 Democrats that's going to vote for it. Just an observation. Now they may have to change some things here, change some things there, but for me, I don't think this is something that will pass through the Senate. We'll wait and see. We'll wait and see. Ukraine and Russia. War is still going on over there. Every week we hear that there's discussions about Russia pulling out. Supposedly Russia was going to pull out this week. It was a hoax. They ain't went nowhere. Still people fleeing, trying to get out of Ukraine because everything that's going on and so forth. So, man, you remember back when this first started, I brought up the article and I talked about where There were Africans who were in Ukraine, and when the evacuations were going, they were being held up for not being able to evacuate. They weren't being let into certain borders. They weren't being let into Poland, Belarus, all the places people were evacuating. The Ukrainians were getting in. They weren't letting people on the trains, people of color on the trains. The Africans were being pushed aside for true Ukrainians per se. But now, there have been over 4 million refugees that have left the country. Since the onset of the rising conflict, non-white refugees have struggled to exit Ukraine with the level of deference and relative ease of white Ukrainians. For those fortunate enough to make it out of the war-torn country in nearby Austria, Poland, and Estonia, many African students are now sitting in overcrowded and unsanitary holding centers, while many white refugees have already been processed, relocated, and welcomed graciously to other European countries. So we still got this racism, classism, isms, whatever you want to call it, going on over there in Ukraine during the war as these people are fleeing, going into other countries. You have Africans that are being detained, locked up, not being processed as quickly as the white Ukrainians. Some exiting African students were reportedly told by Ukrainian officials to go back and fight, even though they had no training or allegiance to the country. Students from Cameroon and Nigeria were identified in one camp by Democracy Now!, which is a research place. Both of the African nations' embassies state that they are unaware of why their citizens are being detained and are actively working to extract them. They say people are being treated differently based on where they're from, even if they're fleeing the exact same conflict. Just makes these double standards even more obvious. Many of Ukraine's African students are considered third-party nationals, and even though earlier this month a temporary protection directive was evoked by the European Union to accept refugees from the European nations, those students are not being processed or successfully deported as expected. Taken to prison, listen to this now, taken to prison, several of the detained students claimed they felt kidnapped before arriving to their eventual detainment center. They have been holding these African students, and I want to get this right. They have been holding these African students in holding centers, not because anything they've done wrong. They're trying to flee a war-torn country. They're trying to flee just like the white Ukrainians, although they're African. They're trying to flee, and they're putting them and separating them and putting them in holding cells. This is what I'm saying. In cells, just like they did here at the border when they had the kids down there and everybody was in uproar about them holding the kids and everything in those, buildings down there with the cages and everything. They're doing the same thing over in these other countries when they're fleeing Ukraine. And they're only doing it to the people from Africa, the ones from Cameroon and places like that, the students that were over there studying. When it was said through the European Union that these people that were fleeing there would be accepted into these countries with no problem because they're fleeing the war. But it still shows you that as much light has been shined on this, nothing's changed. They're still separating people by how they look rather than the safety of knowing that they're fleeing to a safer place than where they were. Now, I've seen this week that they were talking about the 100,000 Ukrainians that the United States is willing to accept. But I also seen an article where they talked about the Haitians, the people from Haiti, if you recall, last year sometime. They were fleeing Haiti, came through Mexico, and came to the border, and they were turned away. But the people in Haiti were fleeing a war-torn country because, if you recall, they had killed the president of Haiti at the time. So these people that were fleeing to get to the United States for freedom and asylum away from Haiti, where it was a war-torn country. But because of the border that they were coming in at, no, you can't come through here. See, everybody most people always want to talk about the Statue of Liberty and what it stands for. The Statue of Liberty and what it stood for and what it stands for was only relevant for the people that were fleeing to the United States of America from Europe. Because if you ever notice, no one has a problem coming in through the border of Canada unless they look a certain way. No one has a problem coming in on flights from Europe and landing in New York and the East Coast or whatever unless they look a certain way. No one had a problem coming from Asia into the United States on the West Coast border until COVID-19 kicked in because they looked a certain way. But the border, the southern border of us and Mexico has always been an issue with this United States of America. And the question I will ask is, why is that? Why is the southern border such an issue when it comes to immigration compared to people flying in from Europe, people coming across from Canada, and until recently, people flying in from Asia? Why? I don't have to answer the question for you. Everybody knows. See, we can't talk about how this country is for the freedoms that it exposes and talks about if we're picking and choosing who we allow to have access to these freedoms. Not because they don't have, well, let's just go back. When they say they accept these people from war-torn countries and things like that, we're supposed to accept them and let them go through the process of becoming citizens of this country because they're fleeing war-torn countries or whatever's going on in their country they need freedom from. But we get selective about who we're going to accept when the time comes. So when people want to talk about the immigration policies and what they were under, you can go back to Bush, Reagan, Reagan, Bush, then Clinton, and then to Bush again, and then to Obama, and then to Trump, and then to current President Biden. There has been no consistency in how immigration is done in this country. The only consistent thing is that the immigration is being done according to what they feel is important and who is important at that time. Because if immigration was being done the way it should be done, it would be consistent no matter where you're coming from. It would be consistent no matter how you look. And it would be consistent because that's what the principles of the freedoms of this country is all about. Now, I'm not telling you that I know all the intricate details of how immigration works and everything like that. I'm telling you from a visual standpoint of what I see, from the perspective of what I read, and from what I understand to be true about what's going on in Europe is the roadmap of what goes on here. The same thing. We've seen it at the southern border. We see it over there with people trying to flee Ukraine. Has nothing to do with who you are. It has all to do with what you look like and what they feel that you may bring to their country or to the country. Because as you recall, when we had the last president running, he came down the escalator and he said, Mexico is not sending their finest people. They're sending you killers and drugs and the criminals. That's who they're sending here to the United States of America. That was the vision that he wanted the people to see so he could get their votes, because the wall. That's all he talked about was the wall. When's the last time you heard anything about the wall until today? And then they come out and say that there's been so many miles of wall built. All they did was redo the amount of wall that was already there. See, when people fall for the okie doke of what the word salad is compared what the actual actions are, this is where the problems come in when you start talking about immigration, whether it's here or across the pond. It's not about what is written. It's about what is felt at the time and who they feel is worthy. Who they feel is worthy to be protected while they're fleeing from the destruction in the country. And I will stand on that. I will stand on that. And it's not all about what legislation is written and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of picking and choosing as far as who gets what, when, where, and why, depending on the situation. That's just the way of the world. And then you have to ask yourself, Europe is across the water, 8-10 hour flight, depending on where you're going. But when this was going on, when this war started and they started talking about people fleeing and everything, the United States of America's government had no problem with saying that they will accept 100,000 Ukrainians, as well as what went on in Afghanistan when we accepted people from Afghanistan. But when you talk about a certain border, they're worried about 5,000 people coming in or 2,000 people being authorized immigration. I've laid the picture out for you. You do the math. That's all I'm saying. So let's get into what I think everybody done tuned in today to listen to. Keep your hands to yourself. Keep your hands to yourself. Now, I say that in this context of what we're going to talk about because we all were children at one time. And we've all heard from our parents, grandparents, uncles, keep your hands to yourself. You know, when you used to do, I know for me and my brothers and sisters, we used to be in the back of that little Vega on them road trips with our mother, with our family, Big Lee, Mom, me, Lynn, Terrence, and Wayne. We'd be in the back of that little Vega. Everybody touching and slapping. And then, you know, Mom yelled from the front seat, y'all stop all that. Keep your hands to yourself. And then it went from touching each other to, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. It was just a thought that I was going to touch you, pissed you off, even though I didn't touch you. I bring this up in the aspect of what happened this week on the Oscars. Everybody's seen it. If you didn't see it, you've been hiding in the rocks. It's been on all channels. People are probably saying, oh, I know he's going to talk about this. And I was reluctant to talk about it. But I think there's some things that I want to address from my perspective that just needs to be said. It's probably going to be different than what you think. My first question about what happened, because I'm not going to go through the whole thing all over again. I'm just not. It's been seen too much. It's been played over and over again. Everybody knows what happened. But my biggest question is, who's the victim? Who is the victim? Because you would think from the outside looking in, by what happened that night, if you just paid attention to the after effects of the slap, let's just call it what it was, you see big name movie stars, Denzel Washington, Bradley Cooper, Tyler Perry, producer. They're all consoling, in my opinion, the perpetrator of the attack. Not the victim, but the perpetrator. I don't know what was going on behind stage because we couldn't see that. There's stories coming out that, you know, people were talking to Chris Rock after the fact, what happened after backstage and everything. But let's talk about during the break, the person they were consoling, who was the perpetrator. And I say that because we consistently in this society talk about victimhood. We always heard, and we kept hearing this week, protect Black women. Protect Black women. We kept hearing that after the fact of what Will Smith did to Chris Rock. He was protecting his wife. But what we lose focus of is for him to protect his wife, what he did was not protecting his wife. What he did by his actions was made his wife more vulnerable to attacks that will come later. Ride with me now. He made her more vulnerable and himself more vulnerable to attacks to come later because of the actions of how he decided to handle a situation that they deemed, or let's get this right, what she deemed, what was said was out of pocket, per se. Because if you watched it, it was not out of pocket for him until it was out of pocket for her. His reaction was a reaction to her actions. Now, protect Black women. I'm all for that. Protect Black men. I'm all for that. But if you're going to sit back and justify the actions of Will Smith on that night by going up and attacking another black man, no matter what arena it's in, attacking another black man because of something that was said, then all the uproar that you had about what happened to George Floyd is out the door. Because an attack on anybody is wrong. Now, somebody will say, well, George Floyd died. Yes, he did. But would it be different if Chris Rock would have died? Would we be talking about this? Would we be looking at it differently if Chris Rock was injured? Will we be giving Will Smith the benefit of the doubt if Chris Rock would have had a broken jaw? Would things change, and would the simplicity of what happened change if someone was injured? Because at this point, the only thing injured is pride. And sometimes pride is harder to heal than a broken arm, depending on who you are and depending on what you've been through. See, I don't want to get into the blame game or anything like that. I'm trying to give you the perspective of looking at it. And I'll ask this question as well. Who was the victim? And also, do we know for sure that Chris Rock knew that Jada Smith suffers from alopecia? There's an assumption that he knew that she is suffering from alopecia. That's what the whole thing is about, is that he said something out of pocket like he knew. Let me tell y'all something. For all y'all out there listening and everybody listening to this after the fact, everyone here listening, live or later on, is guilty of saying something about somebody without knowing the whole story, because that's how you chose to address it at that time. You've said something, you've judged something, you've done something that could be deemed disrespectful to someone else, not knowing the full story. But we're holding Chris Rock and what he said, which I don't think was that bad, because you just said G.I. Jane 2. Everybody's seen the movie. Everybody knows about the movie, most people. But we'll hold him to a standard of that he knew. Or if he didn't know, he should have known. Let me tell y'all something. Everybody doesn't watch my show. And everybody doesn't watch Red Table Talks to know what Jada Pinkett Smith's struggle is. So you can't hold Chris Rock accountable for knowing something just because you know it. Because you took the time to listen to what she's struggling with. That's the disconnect for me. Did he know? And if he did know, was it that bad? Because I hear everybody going away from the context, of these different things. Elwin Pringle Jr., it doesn't matter if he knew. There was other ways to handle it. Well, when I say did he know she had alopecia when he said the joke? The actions after the joke, if you want to say, how he handled it, if anybody wants to look at it, most people, because where we're at in our lives right now, say Chris Rock handled it like a true gentleman. That's what we say now. But in our younger days, when you see somebody get slapped like that, he's a punk. I said it. He's a punk because he didn't retaliate back to something that was done to him. That's the mindset. That's the thinking. But as you grow and evolve, you understand that every action does not cause a reaction. So people will praise Chris Rock for holding restraint and everything. But the restraint, was it coming from restraint because he didn't want to cause a problem? Or did it come from restraint because he was shocked at the time about what had just happened? See, these are all the things that nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to get into this. And then they want to get into Will Smith and mental health. And this was a lot of things that were built up inside him that all came to a point at that time. I'm going to say this. Will Smith slapping Chris Rock had nothing to do with Chris Rock. I'm going to say it. Had nothing to do with Chris Rock. People want to say it had to do with August Alsina and the embarrassment about her and her infidelities and all this stuff. we will find every excuse to try to justify his wrong action. The bottom line, he put hands on somebody that he had no right to put hands on, no matter what they said. And I will take that to the grave with me. You don't put your hands on anybody. And I will say this as well. Shocked. Yes, shocked. And I will say this as well. And I want you all to think about this. Will Smith had time to sit and think about what he chose to do before he did it. And I will say this, you will agree, you may not agree. He chose that stance of what he took and what he decided to do because he knew he was in a safe place. Will Smith knew he was in a safe place, and I'm going to put it like this. If they were at the Source Awards, the BET Awards, or anything like that, do you think he would have felt that comfortable getting up there slapping somebody on that stage? Now, I don't want to do apples and oranges, and I heard people talking about, oh, I can't believe they did that. They embarrassed us in front of all those white people. I don't care about that. It ain't got nothing to do about who was watching or anything like that. It was wrong. Get away from that. It was wrong. No matter how you felt, it was wrong. And then to go back to your seat and continue yelling, the yells, and I'm not a psychiatrist, nowhere close, but I'm going to say this. When he got back to his seat and he decided to yell back at Chris Rock after he sat down, those yells were yells of embarrassment. Because after he realized what he did, that walk back was longer than the walk up. And on that walk back, he realized, oh, because going up, he seen one person. Coming back, he seen a whole room. And all eyes were on him. Not because what he did was right, but because he knew he was wrong. And to sit in that chair and then yell, that yell was from embarrassment. That yell was to try to justify what he had just done. I just got an opinion with what I see. Because at the end of the day, how many places, how many situations have we seen like this where it turns out that somebody got shot and killed because someone felt that they said something disrespectful to somebody? See, if this, let's just break this down real quick. Let me break it down like this. Jerry Page, especially when you slap someone, turn your back on them and walk away. Exactly. But let me break it down like this. And y'all hear me say this all the time, but I'm going to say it again. If that was Chris, if you replace Chris Rock and Will Smith with Ray and Pookie, I'm just going to throw some names out there, some hood names. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but let's just be real right now. If you replace Chris Rock and Will Smith with Ray and Pookie, how do you think that would have turned out? That's why I say they knew. He knew he was in a safe place. Because Ray and Pookie, there would have been gunshots. There would have been an all-out altercation wherever that location was that somebody got slapped. We know it as well as Will Smith knows it, as well as Chris Rock knows it, and everybody watching that broadcast knew. I heard Shannon Sharp say, if it was me, once he slapped me, every time on site, there's going to be a misunderstanding. That's the mentality. But when you're in a safe place, when you feel you're in a safe place, you don't worry about that. You don't worry about that. And then the fact that there was an option of him being arrested for an assault, because what I know to be true, if someone assaults somebody, whether that person wants to press charges, call the police, or anything like that, if it's witnessed, someone can be arrested. Don't have to be no charges brought. The DA can press those charges. Chris Rock ain't even got to be involved in the process, from what I know to be true. So for him to be able to go back and sit in his seat, whether Chris Rock said, no, don't arrest him or anything like that, that's BS. Because it was a safe space. And I will continue to say that it was a safe space for everybody involved. Everyone involved. And then I'm going to go to this, and I'm going to leave this alone. But everybody wants to say protect black women. I'm cool with that. I think we should. We should protect all women. We should protect all men. Everyone should be protected. But what woman, let's just go here for a minute. What woman will sit in a chair, watch her man, her husband walk up on the stage without trying to stop him from knowing what he's about to do? What woman do you know that's going to allow that? Unless, and I'm going to say this, unless you're petty. Because here's the thing. We've been around a long time. Most of us in our 50s, 60s, whatever you want to begin, however old you are. When you, as a woman, and I can't speak for all women, but I've seen it, I've lived it. When you as a woman see your man about to go left, most of you pull his ass back right. She sat there with a smirk on her face after the slap. No harm, no foul. But see, we want to say these things about protect this, protect that, but she didn't even protect her husband in that situation. She did not protect her husband in that situation. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole about the protecting of her husband, let's go here. She has failed to protect her husband over the last 4 or 5 years from the situation she's put him in. Not situations that he brought on himself, but situations that she's brought him into because of her actions. And we want to throw this thing out about protect black women. I'm cool with that. But there's some women, I'm not just going to say black women, there's some women who need to own up to the things that they do to have to be protected for or from. Her actions, her red table talk conversations where she exposes so much about them, you could do a comedy special off that alone. But he didn't say anything about infidelities or anything like that. He said something about G.I. Jane 2. And I'll ask again, did he know that she had alopecia? Well, people say, just like Elmer Pringle said, it doesn't matter if he knew. Well, yes and no. But if we're going to dig into it, let's dig into the whole thing. And if he did know, what did he say wrong? Because if she's walking around bragging about she's come to grips with it, it was a struggle at the time and everything like that, I get it. Maybe that's the face she wants to put on for the camera. And I don't want everybody to think that I'm defending what Chris Rock did. He's a comedian. And unless you're going to go to a comedy show and get up and slap every comedian that says something that you don't like, you probably want to stay home. You probably want to stay home. But at the end of the day, I will say this, and I'm going to leave it alone. As I said before, I know I've gone a little longer. Keep your hands to yourself. Keep your hands to yourself. Because it could have went way wrong, depending on the space they were in. Could have went real wrong, depending on who was packing and carrying what. Could have went real wrong if Chris Rock would have been hurt, other than his pride from being slapped. I know we all get angry at times and we may act out of aggression, but keep your mind. And I'll say this. When this happened, everyone said Will Smith was acting out of character. I would ask the question, has Will Smith been acting as a character until this incident? Will Smith acted out of character, but has Will Smith been a character his whole life? Was what we seen on that stage who Will Smith really is? And the reason I ask that is because when Kanye West does what he does, that's just Kanye West. We don't say he's acting out of character. That's who he is. How do we know that what happened the other night is not who Will Smith truly is? See, those are the things that we don't want to talk about. See, if you're a great actor on the screen, you may be a better actor in your damn life. We don't want to talk about that. See, that squeaky clean image and everything they want to portray and all that kind of stuff. See, those are the things that we tend to overlook. Those are the things we don't want to talk about. See, he acted out of character of who? Out of character of what? Or was he actually being a character every other time until then? He may have been acting out who he truly is. But we want to say he was acting out of character. Why? Because we know him as the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. We know him from all the movie roles he's played. We don't know what Will Smith is behind closed doors. But we give him the benefit of the doubt because he acted out protecting his wife. Good morning, Deborah Harris. Appreciate support. Y'all go ahead and ride with that. I know where I'm riding at. I ain't riding with neither one of them. Right is right, wrong is wrong. Keep your hands to yourself. Because you're going to run up on somebody, you're going to put your hands on somebody, you might not live to see another day, depending on who it is you decide to run up on. Run up if you want to. And I will continue to say he ran up on him because he was in a safe space. A safe space. I didn't see no cops show up. I ain't see him escorted out. Ain't no handcuffs being placed on nobody. Huh? I thought somebody said something. I just checking. Huh? I ain't seen no handcuffs. I ain't seen no cops. Where's security? Security. Keep your hands to yourself. Sticks and stones may break my bones. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Let's go and get into this. Mind, body, and soul. Mind, body, and soul. It's the year 2022. We're taking it one day at a time, 24 hours a day, but we're taking it moment by moment, 1,440 minutes. 1,440 moments a day. That's what we're going to concentrate on. Tony Williams, what's up, my brother? What's going on? Jerry Page, to yourself. Keep your hands to yourself. Thank you, my brother. Thank you. I want to emphasize that today. Mind, body, and soul. Here we go. You are always responsible for how you act. No matter how you feel, remember that. You are always responsible for how you act, no matter how you feel. Remember that. See, this exposed a lot about us as people. I'm just going to say as people. About how we see things, how we look at things, and how we are held accountable for how we act. I'm not saying that we don't act out at times when we don't agree with things. But even when we act out, we know to act out to a certain extent, depending on what our environment is and who we acting out against. Sometimes we get so comfortable that we feel we can do anything to anybody. Right, wrong, indifferent. Say anything out of mouths, all that. But at the end of the day, you're responsible for how you act. No matter how you feel, you can be having a bad day. That don't mean you take it out on everybody else. Somebody may say something to spark you. You can't just go around slapping people, laying hands on people. That's not how this works. See, we grow and we evolve and we get to a certain point that we understand that our actions have consequences. And when you say our actions have consequences, sometimes our actions causes us to lose things. And in that loss, that's when we realize what we did was wrong. We don't realize it at the time, but once we start losing things from our actions, that's when we realize how wrong our actions are. And then the thing is, we try to take those actions and justify why we did what we did to make it seem as though it was right to us. What's right to you may not be right to everybody else, but you're going to be judged on what your right is when you decide to make that decision. We've seen this happen on national TV. It's been a discussion on every program. Hell, we just talked about it. But these things happen every day somewhere in somebody's community, and it's not talked about enough. Then when it is talked about, depending on who the situation is, as I said before, little Ray and Nook, they get into an argument, everybody, oh, that's just who they are and everything like that. Nobody's making excuses for them because of who they are, the environment they're in, what they do for a living, all those type things. But they're still responsible for their actions, no matter how much money you make, no matter what billboards you may be on, and no matter what movie screen you may be in, or what movie you may be acting in. You don't have the right. You don't have the right to just do what you feel you want to do at a certain time to somebody else and think it's okay. You're still responsible. And how people are going to judge you is not the deciding factor on how you should carry yourself and handle yourself, especially in times of turmoil, trials and tribulations, disagreements, so on and so forth. And I say that because when I brought up, and I say this about the environment that they're in, when you go to work every day, you conduct yourself in a certain way. And you conduct yourself in a certain way because if you don't, you know there's consequences for how you conduct yourself at your job. And the reason you tend to stay in line with what is expected of you while you're on that job is because what you do could affect your livelihood. So you make decisions that are best for you to maintain your livelihood. When you leave there, you go home, or you on your travels home, or you decide to stop at Happy Hour and have a drink and somebody say something slick out their mouth, you make it a point to understand your environment, because that environment you had at work when somebody said something slick and you said something back, it's sure not the same environment at that happy hour, because you don't know what somebody's packing, you don't know what somebody's carrying, you don't know what somebody may do to you. But you're responsible for your actions no matter how you feel, because how it turns out could be dictated by how you went in, how it started, what you chose to say, what you chose to do. Now, I'm not telling anybody out there not to protect yourself by any means necessary. But you got to be sure and understand that your actions, you're responsible for, not anybody else's. You're responsible for your actions. No matter how you feel, no matter how you try to, you decide to come back about that. See, sometimes we lose focus that every action, there's a reaction. How you react could make the difference of you being going home safely or going somewhere else. We got to get out of this mindset that when people want to throw out this, protect Black women, protect this, protect that, that does not necessarily mean that there has to be violence involved. That doesn't mean that you got to lay hands on nobody. What that means is be a force in all situations to let people know that you're not going to stand for certain things that deal with, per se, protecting our Black women. You're going to stand in that pocket of insecurity that they need. You're going to stand in that pocket to be sure that they know that as long as I'm around, you're going to be all right. And you ain't got to lay hands on nobody. It's a sense of security. But if you step out of pocket and do something wrong, per se, decide to lay hands on somebody, do something that is not of you or out of character, as they say, you're still responsible. And people should hold you responsible for your actions. If I can hold you responsible for what you say out your mouth when you say it and pull you aside and say, hey, man, no, that's not the way. Then I should be able to pull you aside if you say something out the pocket, out of mouth about my significant other, my friends, my mama. Well, you know, those are triggers right there. When you talk about somebody's mama, that's a trigger. I'm gonna be real. That's a trigger. You say something about my mama, that's a trigger. But I say that all to say this. No matter what situation, no matter what you're going through, no matter what you are responsible for how you act. No matter how you feel. And that's something we all need to remember. Not only how we act, what we say, how we treat people, and how we carry ourselves. There's one common denominator in everything you do in life, no matter whether you're near or far. That one common denominator that everything that goes on in your life is you. And you can only be accountable for you. Choose wisely. Choose wisely how you choose to conduct yourself, because you're the common denominator in everything that goes on in your life. Whether you're acting out, speaking out, running out, acting or showing out, whatever you choose to do, you're the common denominator. It's cut and dry. Let's go ahead and wrap this thing up. I appreciate everybody tuning in today. Look, let's lead with love, y'all. Let's just break it down in simple terms. Let's lead with love. I think that's something that we got to get back to. There's been a lot of things going on. We talk about the racism and all these things back, but at the end of the day, no matter what's going on around you, lead with love. Lead with love. Because here's the thing. If someone chooses to say something out of their mouth wrong to you, and you respond to them out of love, you just disarmed everything that they thought about you and everything they wanted to do towards you. See, sometimes what we don't realize is even a thug, as they say, people they call thugs need love too. So if a thug can settle down and have him a wife, or somebody that's a gangster, or whatever you want to call them, or, the hardest person in the world, if he can find love in his heart for that woman that he's married to and his children and everything like that, he can find love in his heart for you too, depending on how you decide to handle the situation. Take time, step back for a minute, process what's going on. Every action does not require a reaction. What it requires is a response out of love. Remember that. Appreciate everybody tuning in. As I always say before I sign off, I always say, y'all can say it with me today. Love yourself, love one another, keep your head up, and most definitely keep your faith in God. I'll see y'all again next week. I'll holler at y'all. I appreciate y'all, and I'm out. Holla at me. Peace.